C'est bon? Imagine a second that we, together in this room, had the possibility to invest $1 billion for a financial return in companies anywhere in the world of our choice. That's good to imagine. How many websites, how many indicators, how many institutions could we use to be sure to find the best investment for this financial return? 100, 1,000, millions? Now imagine, same amount, $1 billion. But this time, our mission would be to find the best companies in which to invest to reduce the CO2 emission, thanks to their innovation, their goods and services that helps reducing, decarbonizing our economy. Same question. How many websites, how many indicators, how many institutions could help us to find the companies that reduce the CO2 emission? 0. But that was before the creation of the climate dividend. And that's why I'm really pleased to invite you to enter in a new vision of our economic system. A vision in which we have the power to influence the financial flows so they go exactly where we need to avoid the systemic collapse of our economy and of our planet. So we're going to explain you how the climate dividend works. We're going to invite you to join the movement. We're going to invite you to join the foundation of the climate dividend. And to explain that, as you know, it's always better to make it simple. So we're going to start by a short video explaining in 3 minutes how that works.
Many companies have set a goal of carbon neutrality. And that's the good news, because it's kind of burning out there. Even if the carbon neutrality objective only makes sense on a global scale, every step forward is precious. Are you a human being? Good. We're talking to you. If you're also personally concerned by the climate emergency, and you are an executive of a company, a bank, or an investment fund, then we have more good news. You have great power to act. And as you probably know, with great power comes great responsibility. The first part of these responsibilities, as you know, is to take stock of your carbon footprint. You take everything you have emitted this year in CO2 and you categorize it into the main types of emissions. From now on, your mission is to reduce everything you can reduce. But unfortunately, we know emitting zero CO2 is impossible. To understand this, let's look at the remaining emissions, the ones you absolutely can't reduce. See? These are other people's emissions. This is what we generally call Scope 3 of the carbon footprint. As long as the air conditioning you use in your offices contains powerful greenhouse gases, as long as your raw materials are extracted thanks to oil, and as long as your servers consume vast quantities of carbon-based energy, you can't go any further in your reduction process. To reach the global net zero target, we need a collective global investment to finance the innovations that radically reduce emissions and develop new carbon sinks. At the moment, investors who are financing the road to global carbon neutrality are not rewarded as they should be. But that was before climate dividends changed the game. In addition to carbon credits, which allow you to buy units of climate benefits to other parties, climate dividends allow you to become a producer of your own CO2 reductions. How? By investing in a company that reduces emissions through innovation and pays you a climate dividend every year. This dividend corresponds to a number of tons of CO2 equivalent captured or reduced. For example, the CO2 reduced thanks to a company that markets the first air conditioning without HFC gases, which are 2,800 times more harmful to the climate than CO2. Become a shareholder of this company and you will receive climate dividends every year based on the number of tons of CO2 that have been captured or reduced thanks to this system. So if you invest in several companies that reduce or capture a lot of CO2, you earn a lot of climate dividends. The total CO2 reduced or captured by each company is distributed directly to its shareholders in the form of climate dividends. If you own 1% of the shares of a company which fights climate change, you earn back one of the total CO2 not emitted or captured by that company activities each year. With climate dividends, the value of the shares you own is totally linked to the level of CO2 impact of your investments. How we use our money defines the world we want to live in.
My name is Mehdi Coly. I'm one of the co-founders of Time for the Planet, Citizen Investment Fund. And Time for the Planet is one of the co-founders of the Future Climate Dividend Foundation, one of the co-founders with you. And to start, I'm pleased to invite Miguel Naranjo from United Nations Climate Change.
Thank you, Mehdi. Thank you, and hello, everyone. So my role today is to open the chat. So let me start by repeating something that I'm sure you have heard a number of times now, but continues to be very important and actually more urgent every minute. So we are running out of time. So we are running out of time to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. I'm sure that all of you have already started to note the changes in weather. You have started to see some of the impacts of climate. We will continue to live with them for decades to come, probably for centuries to come. But we still have a small window to avoid the worst of it. What's the worst? The worst is impacts that are going to avoid people access to drinking water, access to enough food. Impacts that will force millions, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions, to migrate, to look for another place where they can actually thrive. Due to sea level rise, increased temperatures, conflict. Changes that are going to put the tensions that are going to exacerbate the tensions that we already have in our society. The changes that are going to put the pillars that have allowed the development of our society, our modern society, in danger. So even all the progress that we have made in increasing well-being globally, as far as we have achieved that, as unequal as it continues to be, will be lost. So business needs peace and stability to operate, right? Peace and social stability is necessary to have a business-conducive environment. So for businesses and investors, investing in climate change action is good for the bottom line. It's not only a good thing to do, it is necessary. If you want our society to continue operating as you have seen it up to now, you need, or we all need, to ensure that we align our investments with climate action. So this is where climate dividends comes in. We are not doing nearly enough of what we need to do to reduce our emissions by half by 2030 and to net zero by 2050. And one of the main reasons is companies, investors do not seem to have, many of them, yet the clarity that not acting on climate means putting your business and your investments in danger. If you want your business to continue to thrive, if you want your investments to continue to give you a good return, you have to align it with climate. There is no other option. And climate dividends is one methodology that is coming to help you find a way to do that and to be able to demonstrate that we are aligning with the climate goals. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development said many years ago, decades ago, business cannot succeed in a society that fails. Right? And the World Business Council for Sustainable Development is a business association, as the name says. Right? It's not the Greens, it's not the UN, it's business. It's a business association, and they have said very clearly, you need a thriving society in order to have good business. And our society is inching closer and closer to failure. So we need to act now, not tomorrow, now we are already late in implementing all the actions that we need to avoid this catastrophic climate change. So I would like to invite all of you to look very closely at the methodology that is being proposed here and to use that and any other tools that you can find out there that are credible, of course, to align your investments and your businesses with the climate goals. Again, I can only repeat, we are running out of time, and the name of this event is very well chosen. It's Change Now. So with that, thank you, and back to you.
Thank you, Miguel. So let's deep dive a little. Let's deep dive a little bit more inside the climate dividends. The first question is why the world needs it. The first thing to say is that the goal of the climate dividend is really to target the decarbonation of our economy. What does it mean? It means that, yes, we need to produce less goods and things that are not things we really need. But we always need to produce what is needed to live. And for those goods and services, the challenge is to be able to produce it with a lot less carbon. So that's the goal. The problem we have, if I simplify, is that for the moment, we're not able to do that because the investment we have are continuously targeting companies that produce more and more, emit more and more CO2 emissions. And for the moment, the investment we need to reduce the CO2 emissions, which means to be able to produce those goods and services with less CO2, are not enough financed. So the goal is to have the inverse. But the problem is, for the moment, there's no unified measure. There's no way of comparing those assets. I mean, if you've got investment in a company that is going to reduce CO2 emission, you think you have done a good job, but you cannot be sure because you cannot have any idea of what you would have got if you had invested in another one. You cannot compare with anybody else. And there is unfair situations. The first unfair situation is that when you're a company, a bank, or any big institution, and that you're doing your carbon footprint, in the line 15 of your carbon footprint, there is the weight of your investments, which means the CO2 emissions made by the companies in which you have equity. So for example, if you've got 10% of, let's say, American Airlines, then you will report here 10% of the CO2 emission of American Airlines every year. And that's normal. That's very important to keep that. But the problem is, if on the other hand, you invest in a company that reduces the emissions of CO2, you've got no place to report that. So if you've got no place to report that, you've got no incentive to do it. So you've got no reason to do it. So we ask the financial world to finance the transition, but we don't even have an idea of where to put this money, who are the best investors for the planet, and where are the best companies for the planet. With the climate dividends, you solve this problem because you are going to report the CO2 emissions that you have been able to avoid. And you have to do that in a very strong way. You need to do that with a certification. You need to do that in a serious way so that you cannot use this tool for greenwashing purpose, but only for real, accurate, and efficient investments for the planet. But there's a second unfair situation. And the second one is for the cases where you will report carbon reduction thanks to the carbon credit system. The carbon credit system is currently the only way to finance projects of innovation in reduction and sequestration. But when you are one of the investors of the company, and when it comes to reduction, it's usually a question of industrial scale. You need to find investors. So you need to have people, companies, banks that will have shares inside your company because they will have put money in the company. But if you do that because you sincerely want to be able to show that you have financed the transition, so you put the money, you do your job, you've got equity in this company. Without this investment, this company could do nothing. But you cannot report anything. So the only way to report something would be, first, that this company emits carbon credits, and it's not always the case because there are a lot of limits that are important to put on carbon credits. For example, you need to show additionality. So, first step, this company has to be eligible to the carbon credits. If it's not, then no report possible. If it is, after that, you will need to buy the carbon credits of your own company, the one in which you have invested. That's not scalable, because the best situation would be that the company could continue to sell carbon credits to clients, because it's what happens when it comes to carbon credits. You find clients who are going to buy your carbon credits. And with the climate dividends, what happens here is that you're going to sell the carbon credits to your clients, and on the other hand, as an investor, you will get the climate dividends that show how much your investment was good for the planet. The way it works is very simple. One climate dividend corresponds to 1 ton of CO2 that have been saved thanks to the company. And after that, it's something natural because it's the same system as the distribution of the normal financial dividends in any company. So if you've got 40% of the company, you will get 40% of the climate dividends that the company can distribute. One thing very important before I'm able to give the mic to César is that the climate dividend has the climate dividend has been designed not to be a standard, not to be a new standard, because there are already a lot of standards. Climate dividend is a tool which is designed to be integrated in any existing standards. One of the first standards with which we want it to be integrated is the one called Net Zero Initiative. And César Dugast is going to explain how that works.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Mehdi. My name is César Dugast. I work for Carbone 4 consultancy, specialized in climate change, based in Paris. And I am also the head of Net Zero Initiative. And the reason why I'm here today is that I'd like you to tell you a bit about how climate dividends can be integrated into the Net Zero Initiative, but more importantly, how to understand the climate dividends in light of collective climate action. Okay, so that's me. So I think the real need we have to really understand climate dividends from the investor point of view is to start with understanding what an avoided emission means and what sequestering carbon means at the scale of a company. And to really grasp the full idea of climate dividends, I think we really need to make a step forward the simple scope 1, 2, and 3 accounting. We really need to think a company as something that needs to contribute to global net zero, and not necessarily as something that is carbon neutral by itself or that offsets emissions to be zero or something. The main goal we have as a society is to align with a global net zero pathway. So this means to do two things at the global scale. The first thing is that we need to abate an incredible amount of fossil CO2 that we can find here. So we need really to have this big cut in emissions in the next 30 years. And the other thing we need to do is, in parallel of that, to preserve and develop carbon sinks, again at a global scale. And once you do everything you can, in 2050, the goal is to get to net zero at a global scale. And if we do that, we're saved. But the question that arises is, okay, so it's really good. We understand the IPCC is very clear on this. It's a global goal. But as a company, what can I do to contribute to this? And the answer that we have developed at Carbone 4 is that in this perspective of global collaboration, of global, let's say, contribution to global net zero, companies can do three very different and complementary things. The first thing is that they need, of course, to reduce their emissions. And this is very well known because you already have lots of frameworks existing. You have the GHG protocol telling you how to calculate. You have the SBTI, the Science Based Target Initiative, telling you how to reduce. So basically, everything is really well known. But we often forget that companies also have two other roles to contribute to this global goal. The second role they have is to help their ecosystem decarbonize. And this can be done especially through the sales of low-carbon products and services that are going to avoid emissions. So it has nothing to do with Scope 1, 2, and 3. It's what we call avoided emissions. And the third thing they can do is to help remove CO2 from the atmosphere. What's really important to understand is that these three actions, you cannot merge them. You cannot subtract them, you cannot add them. It's just three parallel accountings that exist by themselves. So if we put a little more detail on these three pillars, these three actions, you can find that a company, of course, needs to reduce their direct and indirect emissions, and it's the top absolute priority. But they can also avoid emissions through their products and services, but also remove carbon either directly or indirectly. So I'm not going to talk about the last line here, which is basically contributing through the financing of additional projects that we often call offsetting. We hate that word because it implies a subtraction. We better call it financial contribution. But the most important thing to understand for our subject today, climate dividends, is that a virtuous company can generate climate dividends if they do a good job at avoiding emissions through their goods and services, or by doing a good job by selling solutions that are going to remove carbon from the atmosphere. So this is the point of view of a company, okay? And then the interesting thing is that when you're from the point of view of an investor, this matrix also exists. And next month, we're going to disclose with Net Zero Initiative and Carbone 4 the application of Net Zero Initiative to investors to show how climate dividends can be included in a climate strategy in line with net zero when you are an investor. So you can understand easily that the core question here is how to calculate these avoided emissions, how to calculate these carbon removals. And this is why we need lots of frameworks to help you calculate in a robust way and with no greenwashing how many avoided emissions you generate every year. And so this is what for example, the gold standard is doing. This is what the Net Zero Initiative is also doing. We're publishing another paper in 1 month, giving lots of ways of calculating when you're a company. But so the main thing to understand is that climate dividends really should be understood in a contribution perspective. Of course, it's not something that will help you be carbon neutral, that will not help you be net zero. It's just a tool to tell you how much emissions your equity is going to avoid or remove. It's just an information, but a very, very important information. Thank you very much to you.
So now the next question you have, I'm sure, is, okay, we talked about carbon credits, we talked about climate dividends. How does it work together or not together? And to answer that, nobody will do it in a better way than Emma Scribe.
Thank you, Mehdi. So climate dividends want to have a pragmatic approach, which means that we do not want to reinvent the wheel. We want to rely on the existing methodologies and the existing tools at hand, which are based on the carbon markets. And so what you need to understand is very simple. Carbon credits are like revenues that come from clients. Dividends are like dividends, and they are distributed to shareholders. So they affect two different types of stakeholders, and they represent two different types of flows. And so to deep dive a little bit more in these specifications, you need to understand that they work together side by side. Because carbon credits aim at financing projects that couldn't be viable economically without carbon credits. This is why they have a financial value. This is why they can be sold, they can be transferred. This is also why you need additionality. And this is why they are aimed at specific projects, and they can help you reduce your carbon footprint. Climate dividend, on the other side, is a completely different tool. They measure your actual impact as an investor and the possession of equity, which means that climate dividends do not have a financial value in themselves. They cannot be transferred or sold, and they cannot in any way compensate your carbon footprint. They are related to your possession of equity. And this is very important to understand because it gives you the opportunity to show your contribution as an investor to the global carbon neutrality. So a company can, on one hand, buy carbon credits to finance additional climate action and climate projects, and buy shares of companies that avoid or remove CO2 through their solutions to get climate dividends every year. And as a company, a bank or a fund, if you have both, you will, with carbon credits, accelerate climate action and show the exact impact of your investment strategy. And as I said, you have on one side the carbon footprint methodologies that helps you put a weight on your actual carbon footprint. And on the other side, you will have climate dividends to show your actual contribution to global carbon neutrality and show the positive impact of your investments. So that was the first point. But the second thing is obviously what's in it for any of you? What's in it for you? So let's be honest, we need to embark on this journey the main stakeholders of the economy, which means the main banks, the main funds, the main companies, because they have great power to act. They have great responsibilities, as we have seen in the video, but they have the power to act on a global scale. But if you understand that, you need to focus on the value proposition. So what is the value proposition of climate dividends? Well, the value proposition is threefold. The first thing is that with climate dividends, you will have a measure that will make your assets comparable. The second thing is that you will have a recurring measure of your actual CO2 reductions or removals. And the third thing is that it's going to allow you to have a long-term perspective because we know it's essential. So about the measure, why do we need a unified measure? Because as Miguel said it, climate change is a global issue. We do not have time to waste anymore on very specific local tools and standards. We need to develop global standards and measurements, instruments. And because we will have a collective approach which rely on the existing methodologies, the existing standards, we will build a robust approach. This is exactly like the peer-to-peer reviews in literature, scientific literature, for example. We need this collective approach. So once it's unified and robust and obviously science-based, obviously, you can make assets comparable. And with comparable assets, you are able to incentivize to say in which companies you must invest. And because the ultimate goal of climate dividends is to have a map, a global map, where you will be able to see who are the best investors for climate and who are the climate corporations who are designed from A to Z to reduce emissions. And this way, you can really drive the transition with investments. So the second thing that has been illustrated in the video is that with climate dividends, you will get, you are the owner of your asset, which means that every year you will have a CO2 return, exact return of what has been the impact of your investment. So with one initial investment, you will have a huge impact. And the third thing, which is absolutely crucial, is that it enables you to have a long-term strategy. Any company, fund, bank that embarks on the journey of decarbonization have long-term goals. If you, I don't know, if you take, for example, the Science-Based Targets initiatives, you will have to set goals for 2024, 2030, 2040, 2050. These are long-term goals. And so you have, on one side, the practical choices that you have to make now, and in the future, the solutions you want to see emerge to live on an inhabitable planet for everyone. And the problem is that these two pictures are the two sides of a same coin, and we need a bridge to encourage investments now, so we'll see solutions emerge in the future. So the climate dividend has the power of doing this because with investment you can have a long-term approach and strategy. So if now I take a very simple example, is that at the end of this conference, if you invest, I don't know, $750,000 or euros, and that you invest that in a company that is designed to reduce GHG emissions and that it is eligible to climate dividends and that can actually distribute climate dividends. If you put your money in 10 years, you will see the impact, and you will have seen the impact all along the way. At the beginning, because it's probably an innovation that is just starting, you will have a few climate dividends, but in the end, you will have a lot of climate dividends because it has enabled a lot of climate return. So I think that this table illustrates the reward we put, because the longer you stay and the bigger your investment is, the bigger the return for the climate is. So I think the three keywords to remember today is that climate dividends are certified, are recurring, and are long-term. Thank you.
So now we're going to take a real life example. And for that, I'm pleased to... there's something with the mics. No, it's OK. So Stéphanie Guitton, Chrétien, is going to talk about her experience at Demeter about measuring the CO2 impact of the investment of the fund.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Mehdi. So I'm an investor. I'm an investor at Demeter. So if you don't know Demeter, we are an investment company focused on the ecological transition. So we were one of the pioneers 17 years ago, and now we are one of the leaders with 1 billion euros under management, meaning that we invest in startups, in SMEs, in infrastructure projects focused on the ecological transition, so in sustainable agriculture, mobility, circular economy, I forget, energy efficiency, etc. So, 1 billion euros may seem a lot, and we see that the amount under management for the funds, for green funds in Europe, increased by 94% last year. So we see this is a huge increase, but it's still only 2.5% of assets under management. So we still have a lot to do, a lot of money to take to the ecological transition. So you really have to understand that we have to convince our own investor to invest in our sectors. So how can we do this? Well, at Demeter, and I can talk about Paris Green Fund, because I'm an investor for Paris Green Fund. So we invest from 5 to 15 million euros in companies which have solutions for sustainable cities. So we've been doing environmental impact due diligence for 4 years now with Carbone 4. So we measure for each company before investing, we measure 7 criteria, including carbon gain and energy gain. I can give you an example. Alteria, a company in which we invested 3 years ago. Alteria is in the energy efficiency for buildings. Carbone 4 calculated that last year they contributed to avoid 4 million tons of CO2. This is massive. So when we calculate this, of course, the company can communicate it to its clients. It's really a good marketing tool, but it doesn't go forward. So we really think that there is a need to communicate more, to measure the impact and of carbon gains. Sorry, I forgot what I was going to say. So we think that measuring the carbon gains is really essential. And it's essential because we are working with several consulting firms, including Carbone 4, but there's no standard to measure carbon gain. So we really think that climate dividends are a very good tool because it's standardized and it's also certified. I think this is the key, to share and to value the companies that contribute to decarbonizing the economy, and then to support us to bring more money to decarbonize the economy. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stéphanie. So, I don't know why I used that. It's very useful, thank you. So, let's now imagine something in a few years, because it's interesting to go forward. This is an innovation that you might have seen here, because it's exposed. The name of the company is Beyond the Sea. It's one of the companies in which we invested as Time for the Planet. How could we imagine the way the climate dividend, which is an extra financial information, as Emma said, impossible to sell it, impossible to transfer it. But is it possible that an extra financial information could be in the future able to create a financial reward? Let's take an example. In this example, you see that the investor A gets financial dividends and climate dividends. At this stage, impossible to transfer. And it's possible to sell the climate dividends, so it's only the reporting that you will be able to do as an investor. But if in 5 years, if in 10 years, the climate dividends become the best way for big corporations, banks, investment funds, to show how much they contributed to the neutrality, how much their portfolio is really decarbonizing the economy, then it will be interesting for those parties, for those stakeholders, to find companies that generate a lot of climate dividends and to buy shares from those companies. And it will be a way for a founder to have an exit. And it will be a way for an early stage investor to have an exit. And so it's possible to imagine that the shares are going to worth more because of an extra financial information. If we go to that, it means that you are going to be able to get more money because you contributed to solve the main problem, the major problem of humanity, which is climate change. And only for this reason, with a certified methodology. This is a very big shift. It's a total new economy, but it works with the current economic system. It will mean that for the first time, the value of your share will be directly linked to the climate impact of those shares. Now, I'm pleased to invite Baptiste to come on the scene to talk about the regulation, because for the moment, we only talked about... Oh, let's take the jingle and finish the introduction. For the moment, we only talked about the private way to start the climate dividends. But we know that the regulation is key and that the regulation inspires from what happens in the real life. So thank you, Baptiste.
Thank you, Mehdi. Good afternoon, everybody. So today I represent ADEME, which is a state agency for ecological transition in France. And so I've been asked to talk about the perspective of regulators. We are in the middle of a very interesting moment for regulators, because regulators are trying to catch up with the best in class in the private sector. You know, the pioneers who took very bold commitment in terms of climate action several years ago. Now, the goal of regulators is to mainstream those commitments, because we need to increase the speed and scale of climate action. And what we expect is that regulation, in terms of carbon accounting, in terms of climate accountability for corporate, is going to moving very fast. In COP26, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, made it very clear that today is no longer sufficient for companies to say, well, I'm committed to the net zero, I'm part of the race. No, it's no longer sufficient to say I'm certified by a Science-Based Target Initiative, I've done the job. No, it's just the beginning of the journey, actually, because you need to show that you're going to deliver, that you are accountable for the commitment you took, and that you mobilize enough resources to meet the targets. And so you need to demonstrate that you have a credible transition plan. And this is why, back to COP21 now, we have been developing at ADEME with CDP the first climate accountability framework for companies, which is called the ACT initiative. And within this moving regulatory landscape, I do believe that climate dividends will have a key role to play, because it's the first robust metrics to measure and track the contribution of investors to the global carbon neutrality race. And this has a very, very important value. And as Mehdi mentioned just before, investors today are expecting climate dividends to be a kind of a bridge between non-financial information and financial value. And if in the coming years, new regulations coming from the EFRAG work at the EU level or the ISSB group headed by Emmanuel Faber at the global scale is to connect non-financial and financial accounting, then the climate dividends will turn out to be not only a very relevant compass for investors, but also a very, very profitable bet. And I do think that climate dividend will be part of the regulatory journey that is just that we are going to take. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Baptiste. So now, thank you. So now it's going to be time to talk about standards, because as I said, the goal with climate dividend is to be integrated with all the main standards of the world. And one of the major standards is gold standards. And so I'm pleased to invite Hugh to come and to talk a little bit about their vision.
Hello everyone, my name's Hugh Salway. I am head of markets at Gold Standard. For those of you who don't know Gold Standard, we are one of the largest standards serving the voluntary carbon market. We've existed for around 20 years. We have between 1,000 and 2,000 projects in across 90 countries of the world, which are delivering real impact on the ground in terms of emission reductions, but also sustainable development benefits. And we've talked earlier about the difference between carbon credits, which is what we're best known for in Gold Standard, and climate dividends. And they are distinct assets, they're distinct products that we're talking about here. But while we're known for carbon markets, what really lies at the bottom, what lies at the heart of what we do in Gold Standard, is having a system to robustly monitor and to verify real impact delivered by projects. So making sure that activities by companies are delivering real impact for emissions and for other benefits for the communities on the ground and for the local environment. And it's this which really matters to what we do. If it wasn't for this robust system, all we would be doing is issuing pieces of paper which have no link to what's happening on the ground. And the same thing really matters for climate dividends. And we've heard certification, we've heard verification, monitoring being talked about a little bit over the time we've had so far in this period. And it sounds dull, and often it is dull, but it really matters, because it's the difference between the numbers which we've seen earlier being just that, being numbers which are reported, and representing real climate impact, which will help to deliver what we need in terms of decarbonizing the economy over the years ahead. And that's why this type of robust system, looking at the methods by which companies actually account for the emission reductions which they are making, looking at the ways in which this is verified by third-party auditors, really matters. And climate dividends is thinking about this in the way that they are designing their system. So it won't be enough for a company simply to say, we've delivered this many emission reductions over this year, and for that to be translated into a climate dividend. There will be a system of third-party audits to make sure that the claims which companies are making are really backed up by what has happened on the ground. So there'll be third-party verification, looking at the methodologies, the methods that companies are using to account. And it's at that point that you'll have the issuance, the generation of climate dividends. And why does this matter? It sounds boring, it sounds like it creates extra burden, but it matters for three real reasons. The first reason it matters is trust. So the trust of those who are looking at the climate dividends which companies have and being able to understand and believe that these represent real emission reductions which have been achieved, reductions, avoidance, removals. It matters for the investors who are making the investments because they want to be able to believe that this reduction has happened there and I can make a genuine claim against this. And it matters for this reason of trust. The second reason it matters, which we've heard about already, is comparability. We want to be able to look at this and be able to compare between two companies and understand the impact that those two companies are having and understand the differences between them. And it's through this type of system that you can have this understanding and you can look at the two different impacts which you're having. And the third reason why this matters is because it is what makes the difference between, as I said earlier, this just being pieces of paper and this representing real impact on the ground. And that's what is really lying behind climate dividends. The question at the heart of this is, how can we take the finance flows, which we heard about earlier, which aren't going towards decarbonization at the moment, and how can we incentivize the shift towards the decarbonization of the economy over the years ahead, and that being a genuine shift on the ground. And that's why this system matters, and that's why I think it's great that Climate Dividends are building this in from the start, why they're looking at the experience which we've been able to generate in the carbon market, why they're looking at the experience of the Net Zero Initiative and of others, and thinking from the start about how do we build something credible that investors can trust and that can deliver real impact on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what's next? What are we going to do now? The first thing to do is to create an independent, totally independent institution which is going to be able to deploy the climate dividend. And Renaud Bettin is going to explain you how this is going to be deployed.
Thank you, Mehdi. Really happy to be here. I mean, you had a great picture of what is the community around the climate dividends. The Time for the Planet, congratulations to Time for the Planet for carrying these climate dividends, but we need every types of actors like Carbone 4, the UN, the Gold Standard, and so on, the ADEM. But we are going to build, because we are also part of the adventure from the beginning, working on the guidelines, and we are going to build foundations just to organize, to create a concrete, a real governance, a unique vehicle, okay, to carry on the climate dividends. So the main objective is to build something for the general interest, and the best vehicle for that is the foundations. But we are going to build that foundation with different boards. The first one is the permanent boards. It will be composed with the standards. Let's say the climate enablers, the UN, the CDP, the gold standard, and these standards will include the use of the climate dividends into their guidelines and frameworks. The second board will be the certifiers, let's say the auditors, so they will come and put a stamp on every climate dividends that will be issued. The third one is Demeter, I mean the beneficiaries, so you will generate the climate dividends and you'll be a very important player of the foundation. And the last one is the technical actors, I mean the tool like Sweep. So Sweep is software that helps big groups to run and manage and implement their climate strategy, and Sweep will integrate the way to not to generate climate dividends, but just to claim it, to connect and to claim, and to have in one single place to have your whole climate strategy. And this is really important because, I mean, the climate dividends helps people, consumers, stakeholders to see who are the good guy, but investors as to measure also that the infamous category 15 of the GHG protocol. They are emitting something, okay? So, I mean, there is probably a way to move from the name and shame to the name and claim. So we want people to claim everything. We need transparency, okay? So good boy with the climate dividends, but it exists already today, the bad boys. Here's the timeline and the agenda. So we are in 2022. That's an information. We are going to build that foundation that year, looking at the founders, looking at probably someone that will be involved. So we will probably open a position, to run the foundation. And then next year and in 2024, we are going to build the platform, the digital platform, that will issue the climate dividends, and then spread it to the world and help people to use as much as possible the climate dividends. So congratulations again to the community around Time for the Planet and around the climate dividends. Thank you.
Thank you. Logistics is really complicated. So now it's time to join. As you know, we've been talking a lot because climate is such a big topic. And everybody knows also now that it's time for action. We needed to talk, and now we need to act. And I personally know people here who in very large organizations, and I know how hard it is, have decided to move fast and break things. So now we can have the power to do something really new. Because to create this project, we don't need to hope. We don't need to pray. We just need to decide it. We do not need, as well, to obtain the authorization of anybody, and that's the good news. Because the economic system is us. We are the economic system. So we can make it how we want it to evolve. So if you think this is what we should do, please join the foundation. Come on the website, climate-dividend.com. Click Join the Foundation. If you don't agree with anything that has been said today, join the foundation. Bring your ideas. Thank you. Thank you very much.